Minnesota's pretty tough defensively, but that's not going to be enough to stop this Penn State team from a third consecutive dominant win.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Zach Seyko. I am your host of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. If you got a score prediction, let me know down in the comments section. This is my preview and prediction episode for Penn State versus Minnesota. For anyone that's new here, I start off with my score prediction and then defend it, give my reasoning and analysis why I am going with the score that I'm going with. And I say Penn State runs the tables once again. Another dominant, decisive victory. Penn State 30, Minnesota 6. I don't think Minnesota can score a lot of points against this Penn State team. Let's start with Penn State and then go to Minnesota. And again, talk about the key matchups on the way through. Penn State is just the more complete team compared to Minnesota. This Penn State team has a top 10 defense and a top 15 offense statistically as it stands right now. Drew Aller is playing at the top of his game. Best performance by a Penn State quarterback in 25 years statistically. And I look at other players like Tyler Warren. Is Minnesota going to have an answer for him? They are coming off of two back-to-back dominant victories as it is, where they started fast and they did not let off the gas. Washington is pretty comparable to Minnesota, and Penn State won 35-6. I understand the concerns with Purdue. That's not a very good football team. But I like the way that Penn State's playing. Penn State seems to be playing angry. That loss to Ohio State awoke a sleeping giant of some sort. Maybe it was the booze at the end of the game. Whatever it is, whatever has inspired a different style of play from Penn State, or maybe it's just because they're putting it all together. I have said over the course of the season that better days are ahead for Penn State football. They shouldn't be judged on the one game against Ohio State. Good solid victory against West Virginia, but had some hiccups along the way, right? Against a Bowling Green, a slow start against USC, but it's a matter of getting used to a new offensive and defensive system. And now going into game 11, I mean, that's plenty of time to get used to what Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen want out of this offense and defense. So, plus also combine the fact that half of the general public doesn't even think this team should be in the college football playoff, that they don't see them as a realistic contender. Probably adds a little extra motivation for this Penn State football team, right? But Penn State could not be in a better spot right now, and I genuinely mean that because the offense and the defense are hitting their strides, and they are as healthy as they can be. In Week 11, this team saw injuries to just about a lot of different key players. KJ Winston, right? And then you add Nicholas Singleton and Anthony Donko and Denai Dennis-Sutton and Drew Aller, and all of those kind of piled up together going into the Ohio State game. And sure, you don't have other key role players like a Cam Wallace in the running back depth chart or Andrew Rapplier for the tight end depth chart, but you end up getting Anthony Donko, Denai Dennis-Sutton, and Nicholas Singleton back. They're all available and they're trending in the right direction. And the freshmen and the backups are getting necessary experience as well. So it helps to win in dominant fashion against a Washington or a Purdue. So then those backup players can get in and get that game experience that's so valuable for them, because you never know when their number is going to be called against a tougher matchup, against a better opponent. As far as Minnesota goes, look, I respect Minnesota, but this team is bad offensively. They are not a complete team. They do not play complementary football. Offensively, they are just as bad, if not worse, than Purdue. Minnesota averages 5.1 yards per play. Purdue averages 5 yards per play. This is barely a top 100 offense in that category. And personally, I would argue that Minnesota offensively might be worse because this is one of the best teams defensively enforcing turnovers. So a team that gets consistent opportunities to get into rhythm and to find its footing, and the defense continues to bail you out time and time again, and Minnesota doesn't convert more often than not. They don't score a lot of points, even though the defense helps them out consistently. I look at this Minnesota offense, and it's pretty one-dimensional. You take away Darius Taylor, that's all-star running back, as talented as they get in the Big Ten, objectively a top 5 running back in the Big Ten, in my opinion, at the very minimum, top 10, and that's being generous. But if you limit Darius Taylor and then limit the turnovers, don't allow Minnesota's defense to build momentum, get some short fields, this is an easy win for Penn State against Minnesota, and that's why I have my score the way I do, because Penn State doesn't give up a lot of turnovers. They don't give away the football. I know Drew Aller threw 3 interceptions against USC, but that's the exception, not the standard. Aller's only thrown 2 interceptions, one in other games against Ohio State and against Bowling Green. So Penn State isn't prone to turning the football over. They do a very good job of protecting it. And then Penn State being a top 10 defense doesn't really bode well for Minnesota, especially in the fact that Penn State has a top 10 run defense, and Minnesota needs the run game to help them out as much as they can. And even then, Minnesota is not that good at running the football. It has to do with the star power, the electric ability of Darius Taylor, and they end up using him a lot in the passing game because the running game just isn't consistent enough. And it starts up front. So you have these playmakers. You have a 6-year veteran quarterback in Max Brosmer. You have Darius Taylor in the backfield. It starts up front if you're not able to get the yardage that you need. Minnesota's offensive line is a weak spot, and Penn State should be able to win that battle up front with just the front 4 alone. Talked about how Abdul Carter, Zane Durant, Devontae Thomas, now Alonzo Ford mixing in as well with Deni Dennis Sutton. That Penn State front 4, whichever combination of those 5 players, is a headache for any offensive line. Defensively for Minnesota, this is a top 25 unit overall. Top 10 when it comes to forcing turnovers. 16 interceptions and 4 forced fumbles. Nearly 2 turnovers per game. This is a top 10 pass defense as well. So in the secondary, you have 16 interceptions, and they're really good at limiting the yardage. So it's going to be a lower scoring game. That total is set at about 45.5. Minnesota doesn't score enough points as it is, and they do have a pretty respectable defense, like I said. But Minnesota isn't getting after the quarterback. So how does the defense fare if Drew Aller has enough time? Because as much as I've been critical of Penn State's offensive line, they actually hold up pretty well in pass blocking. So if Drew Aller is able to go through his progressions and allow Tyler Warren or any of the wide receivers to get open, can Minnesota's secondary really cover for that long? Minnesota is coming off of a bye. PJ Fleck is 5-3 off of the bye week as the head coach for the Golden Gophers. So this really isn't a differentiating factor here. If he was 8-0 or 7-1, I'd say, okay, PJ Fleck really knows how to prepare for that follow-up opponent. He has upset Penn State before at home in Minneapolis, but that was a much different and a much more talented Minnesota team and exploited weaknesses within that Penn State defense. That was a high-scoring game. Minnesota had 31 points in that game. Dynamic wide receivers, a solid passing game, and Penn State had no answer for it for defensively. But this time around, doesn't matter what happened in 2019. Doesn't matter what happened in 2022 when Penn State got its revenge. It's going to stay the same here, where Penn State picks up a 3rd dominant victory in a row, 30-6 over the Golden Gophers. What I want to see from Penn State in this game, Penn State needs to get off to another fast start. Back up my reasoning here, that it just needed them to take time to get used to new offense and a new defense. Back up what I'm seeing here, get another fast start, especially on the road against a Minnesota defense that is top 25 objectively. I also need to see more from the ground game, because if Minnesota's pass defense is one of the better ones in the country, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen and Penn State's offensive line in run blocking needs to get going to kind of offset one of Minnesota's few strengths. It's the secondary, it's the pass defense. You got to do something to get Minnesota to devote some extra resources to stopping the ground game, to open up those lanes in the passing game. So if Minnesota's not going to do that, the run defense could be vulnerable here. Can the defense force any turnovers of their own? An interception here, an interception there, that's great, but it's still not enough to my liking. And it's actually something James Franklin pointed out in this week's press conference leading up to Minnesota here, that the defense is not forcing enough turnovers Fumbles, he talked specifically about forcing fumbles and fumble recoveries because they are intercepting the ball, but one by Zion Tracy here, one by Jalen Reed here and there. They do have a turnover in the past 3 games, Ohio State, Washington, well, not against Purdue, actually. None against Purdue, but before that, 3 games in a row, and then you don't force any turnovers against Purdue when the game script favored the defense to force those turnovers. If Penn State can force any turnovers in this game against Minnesota, this puts the game really out of reach for the Golden Gophers. And how does Penn State handle back-to-back road trips at this point in the season? College football, NFL football, it's a long season, right? It's tiring. And you get to 11 games and you got to go on the road back-to-back against Big Ten conference opponents. I want to see that's probably one of the bigger obstacles that needs to be talked about here is back-to-back road games to finish up the season. And what I do want to see from Penn State, blow out Minnesota. Blow out this Minnesota team, another dominant, convincing victory because, like I said, half of the general public, whether it's the media or spectators, fans of college football, do not see this team, even if they finish 11-1, as a legitimate college football playoff contender. So, prove the doubters wrong once again, destroy Minnesota, and win convincingly. Now, how's that all going to happen? Well, there are specific players, XFactors, that their performances will make or break the game for both sides. We'll talk about that and the key matchups to watch for on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by Mint Mobile. I love a great deal as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to crawl through a bed of hot coal just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile said it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, you got to call them out on it. Turns out it really is that easy to get wireless for just $15 a month. The longest part of the process is spending time on hold, waiting to break up with your old provider. To get started, just go to mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. There, you'll see that right now, all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. All plans come with high-speed data, unlimited talk, unlimited text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network, and you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months of premium wireless service for just $15 a month. To get this new customer offer, your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. That is mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower, above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Let's go through some key matchups that will decide the outcome of this game, as well as keys to victory for both teams here. Starting with the matchups, Penn State, and I've mentioned some of these along the way already, but to highlight them specifically, Penn State's front four against Minnesota's offensive line. Penn State's front four is not getting enough credit here. Zane Durant and Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter specifically all have reason to potentially be taken in the first round of next year's NFL draft. At least day 2 picks. Abdul Carter, a surefire first rounder, but Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant are certainly in that fringe first round pick conversation, and it's why Penn State's front four has been dominant as it has as of late, and why Tom Allen doesn't have to blitz all of the time because the front four gets pressure organically against Minnesota's offensive line. That this could be a mismatch that Penn State can exploit here. Darius Taylor, Minnesota's starting running back, star player, best overall player on this team, easily. Kobe King and Tony Rojas. Taylor is going to be used in the ground game. He's going to be used in the passing game. How do the linebackers, any of them, who is going to specifically pick up Taylor here and be the one-on-one matchup? Whoever, I think the responsibility will rotate throughout the game, but primarily Kobe King and Tony Rojas are going to be responsible for knowing where number one is on the football field. And then Minnesota's passing game, if Penn State's going to sell out for the run, you got to find ways to offset it here. So I'm going to look at Minnesota's number 1 wide receiver in Daniel Jackson versus Penn State's number 1 cornerback in A.J. Harris. If Penn State is going to devote those extra resources to making sure that Minnesota can't run the football, can Daniel Jackson win in one-on-one coverage against A.J. Harris? I like Harris's chances better in those one-on-one matchups, but we'll see. He is the leading receiver for Minnesota for a reason, and it's not even close. Minnesota's pass defense against Tyler Warren. So kind of the flip side of it. If Penn State wants to run the football, establish the ground game, that's going to be key. That's going to be a key to victory here. Minnesota's pass defense has to find ways to limit Tyler Warren. Easier said than done, but that's if you're going to stop the ground game, that's going to open up avenues for Tyler Warren to have another big game. And Penn State's pass blocking versus Minnesota's pass rush. Penn State's pass blocking, if they give Drew Aller the time, as I have mentioned, to go through his progressions, go through his reads, and allow pass catchers, Tyler Warren, receivers, or even running backs out of the backfield to get open, can Minnesota's pass rush do enough to either disrupt that and allow the secondary to make plays, or is this just a mirage that Minnesota's secondary is good because they don't have to cover as long? What happens when they do have to cover longer than expected? Can Penn State turn that into, can Penn State win that specific matchup there? Now, these are some X factors that can determine the outcome if they have a really good, a really positive or a really negative game between Penn State and Minnesota here. Any of Penn State's wide receivers are the X factor here, particularly Amari Evans and Tyseer Denmark, because I look at that Minnesota secondary, I look at that Minnesota pass defense. All the attention is going to be on Tyler Warren. All of the attention is going to be on Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen in the backfield. It's any of the wide receivers, but Amari Evans has really gone quiet here as of late. He's that deep threat. He's somebody that can get you 100 yards off of 3 catches, and he's completely disappeared as of late. Is Amari Evans a real downfield threat for Penn State's offense, or is he just a gadget player in a sense? We'll see if he can have a big game to kind of help offset what Minnesota is going to do to take away Tyler Warren and the ground game. And then Tyseer Denmark. Penn State just needs another playmaker, because I can easily say, oh, Liam Clifford, oh, Trey Wallace, oh, Julian Fleming, any of the veteran receivers. How about it's Tyseer Denmark's turn? I feel like we've learned enough about Penn State's wideouts that they are what they are. They're good, they're solid, but they have not proven to be true difference makers where they can take over a game. Trey Wallace is the closest to that category, so why not give a young wide receiver an opportunity to step up in that case? Tyseer Denmark is that player. Over on Minnesota's side of things, so Darius Taylor is the obvious X factor. I don't need to give my reasoning why Minnesota wants to get Darius Taylor involved in the game. But Max Brosmer, if he can be efficient, limit mistakes, and he already doesn't make a lot of mistakes as a 6th-year senior, but Brosmer does need to be more involved in this game. He can run the football, so Penn State's got to be aware of his dual threat capabilities. He's not a true dual threat quarterback, but if you don't pay attention to him, if there's not a QB spy and he sees an opening, he will take it. Brosmer's decision making can keep Minnesota in this game if he is really on his A game. And then going back to Minnesota's offensive line, you got to create lanes for Darius Taylor. You got to give Max Brosmer time. Minnesota has decent playmakers, so it is up to the offensive line to give them time to make said plays. Looking at just players overall, key players statistically, how they've done. Drew Aller, almost a 72% completion percentage, 2,253 yards, 16 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. Katron Allen's Penn State's leading rusher to this point, 654 yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. Singleton, 538 yards on 95 carries, averaging over 6 yards per carry. 4 touchdowns on the season. Tyler Warren is the leading receiver with 808 yards and 67 receptions with 5 receiving touchdowns. Trey Wallace is that second leading receiver, 31 catches, 533 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And then defensively, Jalen Reed, Zachy Wheatley, and Kobe King are the leading tacklers for Penn State, and Jalen Reed does have 3 interceptions to this point in the season, but everyone's making plays in the secondary. A lot of passes defended by a variety of different players, whether it's Zion Tracy, Elliott Washington, Reed, Wheatley, AJ Harris. Everybody is active when it comes to defending passes, but maybe some more interceptions can be key down the stretch. As for Minnesota, Max Brosmer, starting quarterback, 2,251 passing yards, a completion percentage of 67%, 14 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. The offensive line has surrendered 23 sacks on the season. That is a lot. That is almost 3 per game in Minnesota's case. Darius Taylor, 672 yards on the ground, averaging just under 5 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns. They do have Marcus Major to back him up, 272 yards, averaging just about 4 yards per carry there and a couple of touchdowns. Daniel Jackson's that leading receiver, 63 receptions, 712 yards. Like I said, it's really not close. Darius Taylor slots in with 45 receptions and 312 yards. Like I said, he's that do-it-all player, and 2 touchdowns through the air as well. Jamison Gears had a big game against Rutgers most recently. That's the game that Minnesota's coming off of a 26-19 loss, but Gears ended up being a huge factor in the receiving game. 23 receptions, 215 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the season. A bulk of that actually came against Rutgers most recently. And then looking at Minnesota's defense, Cody Lindenberg does it all at linebacker. 76 tackles on the season. That's the second closest is Kerry Brown, defensive back, with 49. So Cody Lindenberg is everywhere on the football field. Ja Joyner and one of a former Penn State recruiting target, Anthony Smith, have 4 sacks apiece, and everybody has an interception on this on this Minnesota defense. Just about everybody. Coy Parrish, defensive back, Ethan Robinson, Justin Wally, Kerry Brown, Lindenberg himself, Jack Henderson. You get the point. Everybody is forcing turnovers, interceptions particularly, on that Minnesota defense. And then, with all of the players and how they contribute out of the way, here are the specific keys to victory for Penn State and then Minnesota. Offensively, for Penn State, you need to score early. You need to score early, jump out, and build a double-digit lead. Minnesota's offense is not built to play from behind, as you can see against Rutgers. So establish the ground game. Utilize play action, because Minnesota's run defense is the weak spot. It's okay. It's top 50. It's actually top 40. So it is decent. It's respectable, but it's the secondary that helps out with that. Utilize play action to take some pressure off of both the passing and the ground game. Use the run to set up the pass, if you will. Because if you can get Minnesota overcommit to the run, then pass defense will weaken. Do not turn the football over. Minnesota thrives on turnovers. If Penn State wins this turnover battle or offsets it, that puts Minnesota at a serious disadvantage. It also keeps the crowd out of it too. Minnesota's crowd is going to be pretty rowdy. They're looking to play spoiler here. And remember that moment from 5 years ago in 2019 when they did just that to that Penn State team. Pass blocking, allow Aller time. Minnesota's secondary is good, but they can't cover forever. No secondary can cover forever. If you give Aller time, eventually he will find somebody. Defensively, I've already said it, take away Darius Taylor, force Minnesota into obvious passing situations, and the defensive backs must win one-on-one battles. So if you're committed to stopping Taylor, you are going to have to win your one-on-one battles against Daniel Jackson, the wide receiver, or the tight end, Jamison Gears. Those are important if they're in one-on-one coverage. Looking at Minnesota's keys to victory, because why not? Even though I don't think Minnesota wins here, really has a chance. Take away Penn State's running game. Force them to play in the strength of your defense. Force them into obvious passing situations where you can try to force interceptions. If Minnesota is going to win, they need to force at least, honestly, I said 2 originally, maybe even 3 turnovers, because Penn State is just the more complete team, and you need to build a lead and just play keep away from Penn State. Build a double-digit lead and just play keep away offensively for Penn State. Get Darius Taylor into rhythm. That's obvious, but honestly, get Max Brosmer into rhythm, because the ground game isn't necessarily the weaker part of the two for Minnesota. The ground game isn't necessarily the issue here, but that's what PJ Fleck wants to rely on. So if that's your go-to, see if you can get the passing game into rhythm as well. We'll wrap it up with some game info, injuries that you need to know about that could have an impact on the outcome of this game. I'll tell you more on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by Skylight Frames. Are you trying to find the perfect gift for a group of people? If you come from a big family, it can be hard and expensive to buy each one a personal gift for the holidays. We've got the perfect gift for you. Skylight Frame is the touchscreen digital photo frame for your whole family that they'll love. Upload thousands of photos from your phone and watch them appear in seconds. It's so easy to use. Setup will take less than 60 seconds and seamless sharing. Invite friends and family to easily share photos via the free Skylight mobile app or email no account or subscription is required. You can add new photos straight from your phone from anywhere. It only takes a tap on your phone to send new photos to a frame across the country. It is the fastest, easiest way to keep loved ones in the loop. They'll feel so much more connected to you. Satisfaction guaranteed. We're confident that you'll love Skylight. We offer free 120-day returns, and Skylight is a top-rated brand. Over 1 million happy customers, thousands of 5-star reviews, and available in over 30 countries, and it's been recommended by the Today Show, Forbes, New York Magazine, and so much more. And now, as a special limited time offer to our listeners, get $20 off your purchase of a Skylight frame when you go to skylightframe.com/college. That is skylightframe.com/college to get $20 off your purchase now at skylightframe.com/college. And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet just $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. It's that convenient. It's that simple. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And let's look at FanDuel for the latest lines for Penn State versus Minnesota. Penn State is a 12.5-point favorite, minus 520 on the money line. If you're looking to bet Minnesota, plus 385 on the money line, the total is set at 45.5. If you like those lines, all you got to do is go to FanDuel.com. And remember, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Overall, this is what to expect as far as the game plans go. So this is how we do the final segment, talk about the game plans for both teams, game info, and some key injuries. Penn State's offense, expect Penn State to run the football more and utilize that play action, as I've mentioned, given that Minnesota's pass defense is as good as it is. They are as good as advertised. And Singleton and Allen are both healthy. You also have Corey Smith that is starting to come into his own as a true freshman. So the ground game can be relied on here. The offensive line is as healthy as you can hope it would be. And once Penn State builds a lead, they will look to chew clock. There's no reason to continue to air it out, put the football in the air with, like I said, Minnesota's ability to force turnovers, but also the clock time will be the biggest enemy of Minnesota if they are trailing by 2 touchdowns or more. Minnesota runs a 4-3 base defense. They will run a decent amount of zone coverage. That's why they do so well, because they're good at tricking the opposing quarterback. But Drew Allar's a veteran of the game now. He understands. He knows how to read a defense, which is why I think Penn State won't have as many issues here. They are not prone to turning the football over, but it is key for the wide receivers. Step up, find those openings, and give Penn State, and just help add to Penn State's attack offensively. We know about Penn State's defense. They run a 4-2-5 as the base. And if Minnesota is going to go maybe a little more ground and pound, maybe you do bring an extra linebacker in. So Tom Allen's willing to switch up the defense based on the personnel here, but they have shown a commitment to the 4-2-5 all season. I don't see them changing that anytime soon. Minnesota will do a lot of things offensively. They'll go multiple sets. They'll go under center. They'll spread it out. Typically, if that's the case, they'll go 3 wide receivers and a tight end. As far as the game info, remember, this is a rivalry game. There's actually a trophy. The Governor's Victory Bell is on the line here, and Penn State leads the series 10-6. Most recently in 2022, they won. It was the whiteout game. It was the homecoming game, 45-17, Penn State over Minnesota in Beaver Stadium. But before that was a long 3 years for James Franklin to get that revenge opportunity. 31-26 at Minnesota. The Gophers ended up winning that game and derailing Penn State's playoff hopes with Sean Clifford as a first-year starter at that point in time. That's how long ago that was. And then in 2016, don't forget about this game. That was the 29-26 overtime game, Saquon Barkley walk-off touchdown. But that was the game that ultimately saved that magical 2016 season. The Urban Charles juggling catcher looked from behind and ended up scoring a touchdown to keep the Nittany Lions in it. So there is a little bit of a back and forth in this game between these two teams recently, as history has shown. It's a 3:30 Eastern Time kickoff on CBS. I think that benefits Penn State. If this was a night game, the environment would just be a little more rowdy and something Penn State would have to deal with, but it's not something that they're unfamiliar with. They just played out Wisconsin in a night game. So They are familiar with it. They know how to handle that. It's at Huntington Bank Stadium in Minneapolis, so it's at Minnesota. It's a road game for Penn State, but want to state the obvious just because 12.5 spread favors Penn State. They are 12.5-point favorites, minus 520 on the money line. If you're looking at Minnesota's money line, it's plus 385. The total is 45.5. This is going to be a chillier game. If you're going, safe travels. Temperatures are expected to be in the low 30s, maybe the upper 20s as the sun begins to set. Not too windy, 3 to 5 mile an hour winds expected, no rain, most importantly. Again, this is a middle of the week forecast, so just prepare accordingly if anything changes here. And then injuries to wrap it all up. Like I said at the top of the show, Penn State's team is healthy as it could be. Under the circumstances, they are as healthy as they could be. We know that KJ Winston's most likely going to be out. Andrew Rapplier and Cam Wallace, those guys are going to be out and not be available for this game against Minnesota. But depending on how practice goes, could we see a Caden Saunders back, a Keon Wiley at linebacker? Those guys are questionable. They're practicing. They're coming back from injury. Are they ready for this game, or is Penn State still strategically trying to ramp them up for the postseason? Are they playing the long game here with Saunders and Wiley? That is yet to be seen. Minnesota, I would argue, is maybe a little healthier, and that bye week allowed them to get healthier to this point. They've had different players kind of cycle in and out off of the injury report. Most recently, though, key players that were out against Rutgers, Darius Green, the safety, and Tyler Cooper, the offensive line. Those are key players for Minnesota. Will they be back? We'll label them as questionable, but they were out for that game. And that was actually the second consecutive game that they missed. And then as good of a playmaker at tight end as Gears is for Jamison Gears for Minnesota, the tight end depth has been all over the place. At one point in time, Minnesota had 3 different tight ends show up on the injury report, so they seem to be healing at this point in time. But that's kind of a broad overview of what Minnesota's availability report could look like come game day. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Again, if you have a final score prediction, let me know down in the comments section. And what is the key matchup that you're looking at or the differentiating factor? Do you think this is an upset spot for Minnesota? I don't think it is. I don't see this as a trap game, but if you do, I want to know your thoughts down in the comments section. I'd appreciate it if you left a like on this show. Thank you so much for checking out this episode. And if you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams.